Jackson Harper sat alone, his office cloaked in a dim gray hush that matched the weight in his chest. The stack of complaints before him wasn't just paper. It was betrayal in ink. He read the newest one, a woman humiliated for trying to pay in coins. His jaw clenched. This wasn't the company his father had built with worn hands and big dreams. This was something hollow, corrupted. On the wall, a faded photograph stared back at him. His father, young and proud, stood in front of their very first shop. Below it, the words, "People first, always." That slogan had once meant something. Jackson closed his eyes, letting his father's imagined voice wrap around his thoughts. When he opened them again, there was steel behind them. The reports? Lies. The truth? Buried. But not for long. His voice was quiet, almost like it didn't want to be heard. There's only one way to find out. By dawn, Jackson Harper was no longer the CEO. The crisp suit, the glossy title, gone. In their place was an apron and a name tag that read, Tom. He pushed open the heavy glass door of one of his stores, hoping for warmth. Instead, he was hit with the acrid staleness of burnt beans and something more sour, like rot. The bell above the door made a half-hearted jingle. Inside, the place felt dead. Not empty, just lifeless. The energy was thick, oppressive. He scanned the room. Customers waited in silence, eyes dull, movements lethargic. Some tapped their phones, others stared at nothing, like hope had clocked out long ago. No one smiled, no one greeted. Machines hummed in the background, the only sign this place was awake. Behind the counter, 2 employees moved with mechanical fatigue, their eyes cast down, avoiding life. The floor stuck to his shoes. Counters were smeared. In the corners, boxes were piled carelessly, like no one had cared enough to move them. Trash bags sagged near the exit, ignored. A single light above flickered, buzzing like a warning. Jackson adjusted his apron, tugging at the tag. Tom. Today, he was just another nobody. No one looked twice at him. That anonymity hit him harder than expected. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, not with fear, but something heavier. This wasn't a coffee shop, it was a graveyard for dignity. Then a voice sliced through the stillness, abrupt and annoyed. "Where's the new guy?" A man approached, thick-set, mid-40s, jaw clenched in permanent judgment. His name tag, Steve. His presence dominated the room with an air of command, but not respect. "That you?" Steve barked. Jackson nodded. "Aprons are in the back. Don't mess up orders." That was it. No welcome, no handshake. Just orders barked like commands in a trench war. Steve spun around, already yelling again. "Table 5 is still waiting. Move!" The room twitched. One barista jumped to life. Another spilled milk. Steve cursed under his breath but didn't help. Just kept walking, arms crossed, scanning the room like a warden. Jackson stood still, taking it all in. This wasn't stress. This was a culture of fear, and Steve ruled it with an iron indifference. Then, a softer voice beside him. "First day?" Jackson turned to see a woman, slender, pale, her apron stretched over her belly. She was visibly pregnant. Her name tag read Emma. Her smile was real, but weary. "I'm Emma, here," she said, handing him a clean rag. "Wipe the counters between orders. Cups are there, syrups to your left. Stay near the register or Steve will bite." She moved like a whisper, efficient but gentle. Her hands trembled slightly when she reached too far, but she didn't stop. Jackson watched her longer than he should have. She noticed, gave him a faint smile, then whispered, "Just keep moving." Then she turned away, vanishing back into the rhythm. An elderly woman stepped to the counter, her hands shaking. Coins spilled from her palm. "Just a small coffee, dear," she murmured. Emma smiled, warm and unfazed. "Of course, ma'am." She counted the coins gently, each one dragged across the sticky counter with reverence. Then, "Emma, what are you doing?" Steve's voice sliced through the air. Emma paused but didn't panic. "She's paying," she said quietly. "We don't have time to count pennies. Tell her to use a card." Steve's tone was sharp, irritated. Emma's shoulders stiffened, but her voice didn't rise. "It's already rung up." Steve stormed closer. "That's not how we do things." The room stiffened. Emma didn't answer. He snapped, louder now. "I said stop." But Emma didn't. She slid the last coin into the till, finished the order, and handed over the coffee with grace. Jackson's fists clenched at his sides. Something inside him shifted. He was no longer just observing. He was feeling anger, shame, disbelief. Emma returned beside him, her voice a hush. "Don't ask for breaks." Jackson frowned. "Why?" She didn't look up. "Steve hates that." Her words lingered like smoke. She glanced at him, then returned to her task. "Just keep moving. It's easier." Jackson said nothing. But inside, the silence roared. He watched her more closely now. Not just her steps, but the things she didn't say. The way she flinched at Steve's tone, the way her hands quivered after rush hour. She never sat, never rested, never complained. She just moved. Like survival was a rhythm she couldn't afford to break. Jackson folded towels beside her, mimicking the motions of a trainee, but he wasn't pretending anymore. He was learning. And what he saw broke something in him. Because this wasn't about coffee. This was about people being ground down and forgotten, and that he would not allow to continue. Jackson continued to observe, no longer out of curiosity, but from a deepening sense of urgency. Emma moved with a relentless rhythm, like a cog in a broken machine forced to keep turning. One hand scrubbed the sticky counters, the other retrieved cups, fitted lids, poured espresso shots. Without pause, she called out orders, her voice slightly strained. "Large vanilla latte, extra shot." Then she returned to wiping, to pouring, to moving. Her breathing grew heavier with each step, more labored. Jackson saw it now, her shoulders sagging, her back arching awkwardly when she leaned too far. The strain was visible, and yet no one noticed. Not the customers, who stood in line like statues, nor the staff, who were either indifferent or too afraid to act. Her isolation in this chaos was glaring. Jackson stood behind her, towel in hand, forgotten like background noise. He watched her body contort in the same repeated dance. Bend, straighten, twist. Over and over, mechanical, painful. Her apron pulled tightly across her belly. Sweat pasted stray hairs to her temples. In that moment, Jackson didn't see an employee. He saw a woman fighting to stay upright, not just physically, but emotionally. Emma wasn't merely working. She was holding up the entire store, silently. Every order, every mistake, every absent coworker, Emma absorbed it all, quietly, gracefully, without question. Jackson's eyes followed her as she refilled syrups, reorganized cup lids, cleaned spills that everyone else ignored. She wasn't asked. She wasn't thanked. She just moved forward, as if quitting was not an option. Her hands began to shake now, especially when she lifted heavier milk jugs. Still, she wiped the sweat from her brow and kept going. Then the realization struck him hard. The others weren't lazy. They were detached. This wasn't their burden to carry. It was hers alone. And, for reasons Jackson hadn't yet uncovered, Emma didn't resist. She didn't complain. She didn't say no. She was operating not out of duty, but survival. This job wasn't her routine. It was her lifeline. Moved by something deeper than guilt, Jackson stepped forward. He reached for the stack of empty cups beside her, trying to help replenish the counter. Emma noticed. She glanced at him, tired but kind, and managed a faint smile. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice nearly a breath. But then came the voice that ruined everything. "Tom, what are you doing?" Steve's presence cut through the moment like ice. Jackson froze, jaw clenched. "I told you to clean the machines, not play sidekick." Jackson didn't reply. Steve came closer, louder. "She doesn't need help. You're in the way." Emma kept her eyes down, her smile gone, like it had never existed. Steve didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and disappeared behind the clatter of machines. Emma resumed her tasks. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. But Jackson did. Because in that moment, he saw the rule written in silence. Helping her was forbidden. She leaned against the counter slightly, one hand pressing into the small of her back. Her breathing came in shallow bursts. She kept her eyes on the ground, bracing herself quietly. No one noticed. Except Jackson. She straightened. She moved. She worked. Again and again, with no complaint. And Jackson felt something stirring in him, something sharp and unresolved. Was this dedication or desperation? He watched her refill the milk steamer, her fingers trembling. And in that instant, the man who once commanded boardrooms found himself unable to answer a simple question. Was he witnessing work ethic or watching someone unravel? Another customer dropped coins on the counter, hands unsteady. Emma offered a small, sincere smile. "Take your time," she said gently, though her lips shook. Her eyes shimmered, not just with fatigue. As she counted the coins, Jackson stood close enough to see the redness, the quiet pain beneath her composure. She handed over the coffee. "Have a good day," she murmured. But the reprieve was short-lived. Steve's voice erupted again. "Emma, stop playing cashier. Drinks are backed up." His finger jabbed toward the espresso machine. "Move." Emma blinked slowly. Whatever light had been in her face dimmed completely. She swiped her cheek quickly, not even pretending it wasn't a tear. Then she turned, quiet, submissive. Jackson stood in the back now, near the wall. A shift schedule hung, curling at the edges, barely attached. He scanned the grid. Then he saw it, Emma's name, morning to close. Every day. Double shifts, no gaps, no breaks, no days off. He blinked, looked again. Same next week. His chest tightened. The air felt colder. Why? Why would someone subject themselves to this kind of punishment? He didn't have the answer yet, but he felt the urgency pounding in his ribs. Emma passed him carrying a stack of cups. Her face was blank now. Not tired, not broken, just emptied, like she had given everything and still wasn't done. Jackson's thoughts spiraled. This wasn't overwork. This was entrapment. The next morning, he returned before sunrise. Emma was already there. Alone. She stood by the espresso machine, testing the steam wand. Milk spilled slightly. She wiped it clean without hesitation. Around her, the shop was still waking up, chairs stacked, counters dulled with leftover grime. But Emma was already in motion. One hand scrubbed the counters, the other loaded syrups. Her apron strained around her belly, pressing against the edge of the counter. But she leaned forward anyway, forcing herself to meet the speed of the store, like it wasn't just a job she was doing, but a battle she was determined to win, even if it cost her everything. Jackson watched, and this time, he didn't just see. He felt it, a truth he could no longer ignore. Emma wasn't just fighting to work. She was fighting not to disappear. Jackson watched from the doorway, silent as the early morning light filtered through the dusty windows. Emma didn't see him. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't late. She was early, not out of ambition, but necessity. No one else came this early. No one else cared enough to. She moved efficiently, checking machines, preparing syrups, wiping counters. Her breathing remained steady but deep, as if every movement cost more than she could afford to show. She didn't pause, didn't question, only continued forward like momentum was the only thing keeping her upright. Then the peace shattered. The door slammed open. Steve stormed in with a paper cup clutched in one hand and irritation painted across his face. "Why isn't the milk steamer running?" His voice cracked through the room like a whip. Emma didn't flinch. She kept working, her tone level. "I reset it. It overheats." Steve scoffed, stepping closer. "That's not my problem. You're slowing us down." He brushed her shoulder as he passed, intentionally rough. "Next time, open earlier." Emma's face didn't change. Her hands moved slower, more deliberate, but she didn't answer. Jackson watched from the side, his jaw set. No one said anything. No one intervened. Steve acted as if Emma was an inconvenience, not a person. And Emma? She acted like she didn't deserve to take up space. She picked up 2 cups, but as she stepped forward, her knee gave slightly. The coffee trembled. A drop spilled. She faltered. Jackson moved fast, his hand catching her elbow before she could fall. Her skin felt chilled. She recoiled instantly. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice sharp, frightened. Her eyes were wide, defensive. Jackson didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Emma bent down, picked up the cups again, more slowly now. Around them, machines hissed, customers waited. No one saw her stumble. No one but Jackson, and she clearly didn't want him to. She returned to the counter like nothing had happened. Jackson watched the subtle tension in her shoulders. It wasn't resilience. It was resignation. Steve noticed, but not in the way a leader should. "If you can't handle the rush, Emma, maybe I should cut your shifts." Emma's back stiffened. Her hands gripped the counter. Slowly, she nodded. Steve leaned in, voice biting. "I don't have time for mistakes." Still, she said nothing. Jackson's fists clenched, his throat dry. Steve moved past with a smirk like the cruelty had been a lesson well delivered. Emma didn't move. She just reached for the next order, her actions robotic. That was the moment it hit Jackson. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't even trying. She was just surviving. She was holding on to this job with the last pieces of herself. He couldn't stay silent. "She's pregnant." Steve stopped, turned. "What?" "Emma," Jackson said clearly, stepping forward. "She's pregnant. You didn't notice?" Steve scoffed. "Of course I noticed. Then why are you—" "Why am I what?" Steve interrupted, his tone laced with mockery. "Running my store?" Jackson stared at him. Steve's expression curled into a smug grin. "Listen, new guy. You want to be the boss? Go ahead. Otherwise, stay in your lane." He turned his back. But Jackson didn't. For the first time, his anger surfaced visibly. His silence wasn't submission anymore. It was strategy. The lunch rush came and went. The line thinned. Machines calmed. Emma leaned on the counter, her hand pressing into her lower back. Jackson stepped closer. "Sit down," he said gently. "Just 5 minutes." She shook her head. "I can't." "Steve's not looking." She didn't lift her gaze. "It doesn't matter." Jackson paused. "Emma, you're—" "I'm fine," she snapped. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. Her pale face, her shallow breaths said otherwise. But she straightened again, wiping her apron as if that gesture could clean away the exhaustion. Then Steve's voice thundered from the back. "She knows what she signed up for." The whole store paused. Even the customers looked up. Emma froze mid-step. Jackson's heart pounded. Steve stepped out, finger pointing like a weapon. "She wanted hours. She got them. Don't blame me." Emma didn't speak. She kept her eyes on the floor. If she didn't want the shifts, she could have said no. Jackson felt a rush of disbelief. Is this what leadership looked like? Is this what he had been blind to from his cushioned office? Emma gave a small nod and resumed wiping the counter. But Jackson saw her knees buckle again. She gripped the edge, white-knuckled, fighting to stay up. Her breath came in hard, fast bursts. Still, her other hand reached out for the next cup, unwilling to give up. That was it. Jackson moved. He stepped in front of her, took the drink she had begun, and finished it himself. He handed it off to the waiting customer with practiced ease. Emma looked up, her face pale, confused. "I've got it," Jackson said softly. "I'm fine," she whispered again, but she wasn't. She stepped aside, her body forcing a surrender her mind wouldn't allow. Jackson continued making drinks, steady, calm. Behind him, Emma sat on an overturned crate, breath shallow, eyes distant. No one noticed, no one cared, except him. Steve emerged again, eyes scanning. "I don't pay you to play hero." Jackson didn't answer. Steve stormed closer. "Get back to cleaning or you're out." Still no response. Jackson kept moving, voice calm, hands sure. Steve didn't catch the shift, but Emma, watching from the corner, did. "Useless," Steve muttered, turning away. Jackson finished another drink. Then he looked back at Emma. And in that second, something changed. A line had been crossed. Night fell. The store darkened. Chairs were stacked. Lights dimmed, except for one. Behind the counter, Emma stood alone under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, counting bills with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The register clicked shut with a mechanical thud. She noted figures on a worn-out sheet, her shoulders curling lower with each scribbled number. Outside, the neon sign sputtered a pale blue, casting a tired glow through the windows and stretching Emma's shadow long across the floor. She stood inside that shadow, small and still, as if trapped in her own exhaustion. Jackson remained at the doorway, saying nothing, the dryness in his throat growing heavier with every passing second. She never turned, never glanced his way, just leaned on the counter, eyes down, hands braced against the surface like the weight of the world was pressing from above. Jackson's heart ached at the sight. How long had she been closing alone? How many nights had ended this way? Silently, invisibly. Later, in his hotel room, the silence pressed tighter. Jackson held a photograph, his father, smiling in front of their very first coffee shop. Beneath it, the motto etched in faded ink, "People first." Jackson stared at that face, that truth, as though searching for permission to be angry. "If you saw this," he whispered, "what would you say to me?" He already knew. His father wouldn't have spoken. He would have acted. Jackson closed his eyes. Emma, hunched at the register, filled his vision. This wasn't business. This wasn't leadership. This was cruelty wrapped in uniforms and ignored by everyone with power, including himself. Somehow, this culture bore his name, and he couldn't unsee it anymore. The next morning arrived, and chaos returned. Orders spilled over. Machines screamed. Customers shouted. Emma moved through it all, slower now, heavier. But she moved. Her face was blank. Her steps were unsure. Yet she said nothing. She never asked for help. Not once. Jackson stood behind the counter again, helpless rage simmering under his skin. A customer slammed his hand down. "I've been waiting 15 minutes." Emma flinched. She turned to him, voice thin. "I'm sorry." She reached for the drink. Steve arrived like smoke, fast, sharp. "What's the problem here?" The customer pointed. "Her, she forgot my order." Steve didn't blink. "Of course she did." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. Steve didn't wait. "Emma, we've talked about this. Focus. Stop slowing everyone down." She stood frozen. Everyone in the store heard. No one spoke. Steve leaned in. "You're holding up the entire store." Emma lowered her eyes. Jackson gritted his teeth. The customer left with his coffee. Steve sneered. "Get it together, Emma." She turned, wiping the counter with trembling hands. Jackson saw it now with perfect clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This was abuse, daily and deliberate. He stepped forward. "Enough." Steve stopped. That word had weight. Jackson didn't move. He stood between Steve and Emma. "She's not the problem." Steve chuckled, dry and arrogant. "Look at you. A couple of days in and you think you're a manager?" Jackson said nothing. Steve stepped closer. "You want to save her? Fine, take her shifts." Silence settled. Jackson didn't flinch. Steve's grin flickered. Behind him, Emma stood with her eyes lowered, her shoulders trembling. Not with emotion, but with emptiness. She wasn't hoping. She wasn't resisting. She was gone inside. And that was what broke Jackson. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She didn't think saving was possible. Jackson's resolve hardened. No more waiting. Not a shift. Not an hour. Not even a minute. The next morning he entered through the front door. No disguise, no apron, no hesitation. The store looked the same, chaotic, dim, tired, but not to him. Steve saw him first, confusion settling in. "Can I help you?" Jackson didn't slow. He walked straight through the store. Emma was behind the counter, focused on her task, unaware. Steve stepped in front of him. "Hey, I said—" Jackson met his eyes. "Jackson Harper." Steve froze. "I own this company." Everything stopped. Customers glanced up. Staff froze. Emma looked up, her face barely believing. Jackson's voice was calm. "Let's talk. In the back." Steve didn't argue. He just followed. Inside the office, he stood awkwardly, unsure. "What do you want?" he asked, voice shaky. Jackson didn't rush. He closed the door behind them. Then he said it again. Quiet, but undeniable. "I'm Jackson Harper." Steve blinked, his confidence draining. "I own this company," Jackson repeated. And this time, everything was going to change. Jackson didn't sit. He let the silence hold for a moment, then continued, voice low, steady. "And I've been working your store for 2 days." Steve took a half step back, color draining from his face. I didn't know." "No," Jackson replied. "You didn't." Steve looked around the cramped office like an exit might magically appear. His bravado slipped away. Jackson's tone didn't rise, but each word cut deeper. "I saw how you run my store. I saw how you treat my people." He stepped closer. "I saw everything." Steve's jaw moved, but no words followed. Jackson stood unwavering. "I'm not Tom anymore. I'm your boss." Steve found his voice, defensive now. "Listen, I had to push them. We're short-staffed. It's survival." Jackson didn't blink. "That's not leadership," Steve stammered. "She wanted the hours. Emma agreed. She never complained." "She didn't have to." Jackson stepped even closer. "I watched you." Steve shook his head weakly. "It's not as easy as you think. You sit in an office—" "I stood behind your counter," Jackson cut in. His voice dropped lower, firmer. "You overwork your staff, you manipulate them, and you treated a pregnant woman like she was disposable." Steve opened his mouth. No sound came. "You're fired." Silence. Steve blinked. "Wait. You're done here," Jackson said, unwavering. He opened the door. "I won't let any store carry your name, not under my company." And he walked out. Steve remained seated, motionless, speechless. The door swung shut behind Jackson. The store outside looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. At the counter, Emma moved with mechanical precision. She filled cups, counted receipts, called out names in a voice that barely reached the register. She hadn't seen him return. She didn't know yet. Jackson stood still. She was the same woman who had carried his store day after day, unseen, unsupported. Her back turned to him, her shoulders rounded by more than fatigue. The line inched forward. She kept pouring. He exhaled slowly, then stepped forward, no longer playing a role. He stopped beside her. Emma looked up, confused, tired, too late to brace. "I'm Jackson Harper," he said. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I own this company," he continued softly. She searched his face for the lie, for the joke, but there wasn't one. She looked down, then up again. Disbelief took hold. "Steve's gone," he added. Emma froze, completely. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Her mouth opened again, then closed. Her shoulders trembled. "I saw everything," Jackson said, just above a whisper. Emma met his eyes, unsure, stunned. She didn't speak. She didn't move. "It's over, Emma," he said. She swallowed hard. Her gaze flicked from his face to the counter. Fear, confusion, mistrust. It was all there. "You don't have to carry this anymore." She shook her head, slowly, like she didn't believe it. "Couldn't." Jackson softened his tone. "Everything you've endured, it ends today." Emma's lips trembled, her hands clenched at her sides, but no tears, no thanks. Just silence. Because sometimes hope is heavier than exhaustion. You're not alone anymore. She finally looked up. And this time, her mask cracked, not with a smile, but with something deeper. Relief. Jackson reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, plain, folded. Emma didn't reach for it. Not yet. "It's yours," he said gently. Her fingers trembled as she took it, carefully, as if it might disappear. She opened it slowly. Her breath caught. Inside, bills, counted, clean. "This is back pay," Jackson said. "For every hour you worked, every shift you were underpaid." Her shoulders began to shake. A single tear escaped. She didn't wipe it. Jackson stood silently. Emma held the envelope like it was fragile. Her lips parted, but still no words. Her tears said what she couldn't. Someone finally saw her. Jackson turned, walked behind the counter. Staff stared, unsure. He rolled up his sleeves. He began to work, cleaning counters, wiping machines, pulling shots. No speeches, no declarations, just effort. Slowly, one by one, the others followed. A barista grabbed cups. Another started refilling the syrups. No one asked why. Emma stood still, the envelope in hand. Jackson reached beside her. "You should rest," he whispered. She shook her head. But she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't invisible. And for once, she wasn't afraid. Jackson didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His presence said enough. The store breathed differently now. Light replaced the heaviness. Voices rose, not in stress, but in rhythm. Orders flowed. The air shifted. At the counter, Emma moved slower, steadier. Her hands no longer trembled. Her shoulders no longer hunched. A new hire passed her a tray. She took it, smiled. It was soft, real. Jackson saw it, and for the first time, he didn't feel guilty. He felt hopeful. Emma stepped beside him. She hesitated, then asked, "Why did you come here?" Jackson turned. She clarified, "Why Undercover?" He paused, then spoke quietly, "Because I stopped trusting reports." She held his gaze. He added, "I needed to see it myself." Emma nodded. Slowly. "I thought everything was fine," he said. "On paper it was." He glanced at her again. "But paper doesn't carry cups. It doesn't count coins." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her eyes did. Jackson whispered, "Next time, I'll ask the people who actually work." And Emma smiled again, not for herself, but for him. Jackson held that moment. "You gave this company more than it ever gave you," he said. Her eyes softened. "That changes now." She looked down, hands still on the counter. But her posture lifted. "We're not giving you favors," Jackson added. "We're giving you back what was always yours." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She believed him. Jackson returned to his office. The same space, the same walls, but nothing felt the same. A report sat open, numbers, schedules, updates. But now he saw names. Emma's name appeared once, exactly where it should. He leaned back, stared at the ceiling. His father's photo watched from the wall. Jackson whispered, "I'm finally leading. Not managing, not reporting, leading, and he knew it. Because leadership didn't live on paper, it stood behind the counter. He'd almost forgotten. Night covered the city. Quiet. Still. Jackson stood by his window. Far below, the street stretched dark, but in the distance, a warm glow. The cafe. His cafe. Its light spilled through the windows. Gentle, alive. People moved inside, not rushed, not broken. Just there. Jackson watched, hands in pockets. No words needed. The glow of that small place held steady in the night. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a business. It felt like a promise. He stood there a long while, remembering, and finally, leading.